Hi everyone, it's Nicole and I'm here with what I read in March. I had fallen a little behind on my reading planners, so I decided that I was going to just do it right away because we're already into April. So I have two ways that I document what I read. I have this reading planner that I bought off of Etsy. It's called a Bookworm Life, and it has some openings where you can put, the books you want to read, your TBR, your monthly wrap up. There's even a calendar. And I decided to use a few sheets in there every month. There's three that I was going to put the books that I read every month. And the reason that I like it in this planner and also on in a project life form where I keep it in a 12 by 12 is the 12 by 12. I can see that I'll be looking into those albums later on. But that reading planner, I have that reading planner almost out every day. And I flip through it. And, as I finish books, I color in the books that I've read because I have like a TBR list. I keep track of the series that I start, the series that I finish, new authors, how many books I read on my Kindle. So I really enjoy having that I can look at it every day. So for this one, I print my photos pretty small on my Canon Selfie. That way they all fit into my reading planner. I'm using some leftover cardstock and some leftover pattern papers to mat each and every single one of those photos. I did stamp numbers on some little books, and those are the number of the books that I've read. So when I start the year, I start with book number 1 and then I put them in the order that I've read the books. So in the month of March, I read 9 books. So I'm going to have 3 books on each of the page. Now I have these viewfinders and I've had so many questions about where can I find those viewfinders and labels, and these are actually items that are available in my shop. So in the description box below you can find, it says for more information on my classes, but it's the same place. So it's NicoleJones91.com, and I have a spot where it says classes and the other spot says embellishments. And under the embellishments, you can get digital files where you can print your own viewfinders and your own labels so that you can use them over and over again. Now we have some that are assorted, like the pastel one, and we have some that are one color, so you have more, several shades of the same color. So I decided this time that I was going to use the viewfinders and the labels, and that's how I'm going to start each of the embellishment clusters around each of the photo. And then I'm going to go to my sticker books and just add a few stickers just to finish the embellishment clusters. I did add on the left side of the page, I put a piece of washi tape, and then right above that I put March Reads. And what I did last month, and I really liked, is I ended up putting washi tape on the other 2 pages too, and then I would take a quote that was inside of my reading planner and I would write it again on the 2-page spread, and I end up doing that this time. One thing I'd like to talk about is how do I choose the books that I read each month. So what I do about a week or 2 before the next month comes around, I sit down and I make a list of all the books that I'd like to read. There's a place in my planner where I can put my TBR. I make a list of 15 books on that TBR list. Now, I know there is absolutely no way I'm going to read 15 books. I think the most books I've read was like 12, maybe 13 books in a month, but I've never read 15 books. But what that does, it makes it that it gives me options every month so that I can kind of go with a little bit with what I feel like reading, as long as I keep it within those 15 books. And the reason that I make these lists is because I have specific series that I'd like to read in a year. And when I do start a series, I want to make sure that I don't go too many months before reading the other books in that series. So by making a list, and when I make my list, this is how I break it down. I make sure that I choose 2 to 3 books that are from that starts a series, and then 2 to 3 books that continue a series. I try to pick a YA contemporary, an adult contemporary, at least 1 or 2 books that are over 500 pages, because I want to make sure that I read my big books. I try to put a thriller in there. I try to put an ebook. I put an audiobook, and I had put at least 10 books, but I've increased it to 15 because that way I can mood read a whole lot more. Another thing I do is I read more than one book at a time. I usually have before 4 and 5 books that I read at the same time. And the reason that I do that is because some books, it might take a little bit of time before you actually get into it. So I make myself read at least 50 pages per book for at least 2 or 3 books, depending if I read 100 or 150 pages that day. And then usually I'll have at least one book that's sort of what I call my main book. That's the book I want to see the most progress in. And then the other books, if I read 10 or 15 or 20 pages until I get really sort of involved or really invested in the book, and by then I should have the other book done, and then I'm really invested in another story. I don't know about you, but even TV shows, I find that to start something new, I have the hardest time. But if I'm already invested, even though I finish a book, I'm already invested in another story, so I can keep reading that story. But let's talk a little bit about the books that I read this month. The first book that I read was Here at the Falls by Alwyn Hamilton, and this was the last book in the Rebel of the Sand series. This is the 3rd book in the series, so I don't want to spoil anything, but the first book, you follow Amani and Jin, and Amani is really good with a gun, and it's following, they're in the desert. There's just so much going on. They're trying to get back their kingdom. It's so good. This book here, all I'm going to say, it was so full of action. It kept me totally invested the whole time. Broke my heart a few times. I did get teary-eyed. Absolutely loved it. I gave it a 5 stars. The second book I read was Twice in a Blue Moon by Christina Lauren, and they're a duo author. There's 2 authors, Christina and Lauren, and they write adult contemporaries. And this follows Tate and Sam, and they meet on vacation while they're in London. And Tate shares some secrets that she has with Sam, and later on the tabloids get a hold of it, and it sets her life upside down. And before I move on with that, when I do the embellishments for this, I had some stickers that were from traveling, and there was a little guard like the guards that are in London, and I put that next to the book because it was perfect for that book. But I really enjoyed it. I know a lot of people didn't enjoy it, but I really enjoyed the book. I gave it 5 stars. It kept me really entertained. I love the characters. I love the story. I love the adventure. I love, they meet 10 years later and the story continues. I really love that. This next book I read was Wild at Heart by K.A. Tucker. And that is the second book after The Simple Wild. This is the conclusion. And this is sort of their life in Alaska. It was so good. I gave it 5 stars. I love the new characters that were introduced. I especially loved one of their neighbors. He was such a grumpy old guy, but he just made me laugh, and I really enjoyed that whole story, and I love their goat. That's all I'm going to say. I did have a few chuckles over that goat. So the next book I read was Once a King by Erin Summerall. This is a companion book to the Ever the Hunted, Ever the Brave. This is the 3rd book, but it's a companion book. So it follows different characters. It's King Adrian and Lyra, and this is sort of like their story. It does talk about the characters a little bit from the first two books, but their story arc is done. And so it focuses on two main characters, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Again, this is the third book in a series, so I don't want to say too much, but the first one, Ever the Brave, it follows a girl who her father gets murdered, and the king, instead of sentencing her to death because she killed, she was starving to death, so she killed an animal in the forest, which is totally forbidden. He says, I'm going to spare your life if you go after the person that killed your father. And the person that is accused is her childhood sweetheart. And she goes on a mission, to kill him because it's either her or him. And the story unfolds from there. I really enjoy the entire series. This book I gave 4 stars. The next book I read was Throw Like a Girl by Sarah Henning. And this is a sports young adult contemporary. I love books that are centered around sports. And this one is about Liv, who gets kicked off her softball team. But not only that, she gets kicked out of her school because what she did was bad enough for that. And then she goes to this new school, and the new school wants her to be on the football team because she has a really strong arm. And at the new school, the new coach doesn't want her on the softball team. She says that she has to do stuff during the year to prove to her that she's changed and that she's a team player. So she decides to go on the football team to show that she's a team player. Really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. Super cute. Read it super quickly. The next book is also a young adult contemporary. It was called Dear Adam by Kelsey Stelting. This was a new author to me, and I really enjoyed her book. It was, it's a young adult contemporary, but she writes stories that are a little bit more, it's not just fluffy, like there's heavy underline to the story, and I really enjoyed this story. This is about a boy who is considered like the bad boy at school, and he is told that he has to write for the school paper as like a Dear Abby column, or he's going to flunk out of school. And the whole story progresses from there. I really enjoyed this story. I gave it 3.75, 4 stars. And I enjoyed this story so much that I went on Kindle and I looked at other stories that this author wrote, and I'm actually reading a book right now that she's written, and I really like her writing style. The next book I read was Finnegan of the Rock by Melina Marchetta. I think that's how you say her name. This is the first book in a series. It's a 3-book series. They're all companion books. This book I heard Reagan from Peru's Project talk about it for years. It's been on my TBR 3 or 4 times, and I never read through it. This time I read it. I absolutely loved it. This follows Finnegan as he tries to regain their kingdom. There is so much going on in that book. It was so interesting. And one of the embellishments that I put on here was a unicorn, and that fits in the story. So it has some magical elements to it. This was a book that was super action-packed, kept me entertained the whole time, loved it, gave it 5 stars. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but this month I read a lot of books that I absolutely loved. The next book I read was Supernova by Marissa Meyer. This is also a conclusion of this trilogy, Heroes versus Villains. We still follow Nova and Adrian. This was such a good series. Absolutely loved it. Gave it 4 stars. In the first book, Nova infiltrates the heroes because she wants to take them down from the inside. But all of a sudden, it's like, she was brought up thinking that the heroes were bad and they were not the villains. They were actually the heroes. And Oh, it was so good. I loved it. This third book was super action packed, a lot of action and a lot of sad things, and but really good. One thing that I just realized just right now is this month I finished 4 series. So that's really good. I like that when, I finish stuff. I don't like starting series and not finishing them. I really try to, uh, you know, if I don't read them month after month, like I try not to leave too many months in between the books, because I read so much, I'm afraid that I'm going to forget the major part of the story, and then I'm going to be sort of lost. Last book I read this month was Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbard. And this is an adult contemporary about Chloe, who has a close call. Like she feels like, she almost died. And then she decides that she's going to have a bucket list. And her superintendent is going to help her with that bucket list. And, it's an adult contemporary, so there's romance involved. I enjoyed that book. I gave it 3.5 stars. I didn't love it as much as some other people did in the BookTube community, but I did enjoy it. There's a second book that's coming out in June, and I'll definitely be reading the second part because there's a book for each one of the sisters. Now this is where I'm going to put my little sort of subtitle, Reading is Magical. And that's it. That's all the books that I read in the month of March. And I want to thank you so much for watching. Bye.